Before we get properly started, a few quick things. I have videos on the first 2 Spyro games, links in the description. Originally, I started doing videos on the Insomniac trilogy of Spyro games because it won a poll I ran on my Patreon. My next Patreon polls have probably already happened because this video took me forever in production. Now on to the video proper. Executed on properly, variety in a video game can be a very wonderful thing. It can make an experience more memorable and engaging, but it can also risk diluting or dragging down a fun core experience. In Spyro 2, I found the variety provided by the game to be one of the best things about it. Spyro Year of the Dragon continues to emphasize variety in its design, and some really fun things do come out of that, but there's also a couple of problems this time around. I'm Kalice, and while those problems did bother me, I do still recommend Spyro Year of the Dragon. The original PS1 version, that is, not Reignited. Reignited has major issues that we will fucking get to later in this video. For setup this time, we're once again in the Dragon World, same place we started in the first 2 games. Things are apparently going pretty good because all of the dragons, and also Hunter, who is there, are napping. Or maybe it's nighttime and they're sleeping? I don't know how the day-night cycle in the Dragon World works. Whatever. Point is, things are very briefly calm until a mysterious hooded figure and her minions show up from a hole in the ground and steal some dragon eggs. My bet's on her being a member of Organization 13. I'm glad they're finally letting members wear different colored robes. A group with that many obviously gay people in it has no business being so monochromatic. As this mysterious criminal is about to leave, she steps on Hunter's tail, and after a yelp, everyone wakes up and chases the egg thief, no not one of those, off. We will eventually learn that this master criminal's name is Bianca. She's a sorceress in training, seemingly second in command to this evil dinosaur, according to the wiki. I personally think she's more of a crocodile or alligator, but whatever. This is a hill that I don't have the slightest desire to die on. She's known only as the sorceress, and she ordered Bianca and the Rhinox to steal the eggs, and is planning something malicious with them. Ever the competent one, Zoe was spying on this exchange between Bianca and the sorceress. Back in the Dragon World, Zoe lets all the dragons know that these villains and the eggs are now residing on the other side of the Dragon Worlds. This area is known as the Forgotten Worlds, apparently. Since Spyro is the only dragon who can fit through the hole, he's tasked with going to the Forgotten Worlds to retrieve all the eggs. Hunter can also fit, so he goes too and helps. Usually. Also, from the sight of it, it seems like Bianca and the Rhinox just dug a hole through the planet. Say what you will about these villains, they do have a very good work ethic. So that's our mission. Explore the Forgotten Worlds to recover all of the many stolen dragon eggs while contending with the sorceress and her Rhinoc minions. And also Bianca, of course. Year of the Dragon continues the light, fun tone of the first 2 games. Saturday morning cartoons absolutely feel like a primary source of inspiration. While things can get rather violent, Spyro's often burning enemies to death, it's always presented in a comedic, slapsticky way. Most of the writing and animations in the game exist to try to make you laugh. The writing is very good in this respect, pretty much every level got a smile or chuckle out of me, and that made it a very fun experience overall. There are a few moments of the story that get a bit more serious. The stakes do feel very real this time, and there is a character arc that I really like that came out of that, but the vast majority of the time, it's rather lighthearted. The game is vibrant and colorful and is generally just visually pleasing to look at. Even being a PS1 game, I think that the visuals hold up. You can definitely tell it's old, but the designs are cartoony and stylized enough that they still look good today, as far as I'm concerned. The animations also still look expressive and robust, enough so that even though you can see that they're very old, they also still look good enough to enjoy today. One of the big things that Spyro was praised for at the time was its use of squash and stretch to breathe character and life into its animations. I enjoyed these visual things, and this game was definitely before my time, so can't exactly cite nostalgia for that. I want to say this early on so no one gets the wrong idea. Spyro Year of the Dragon is an amazing game that I had a wonderful time with. It's absolutely brimming with inventive concepts that very often make for enjoyable gameplay. In many ways, it improves over Spyro 2, but in some ways it also feels like a decided step back, and I don't think it's aged as well as its predecessor. I do have quite a few complaints to level at the game, but I did really love most of the time I spent with Year of the Dragon. It's among my favorite platformers, and my criticism comes from a place of love, not of dismissal, so just just keep that context in mind. On that note, I feel kind of strangely about the story and world building here. In terms of the core narrative, it definitely improves on Ripto's Rage, but it also changes certain structural aspects that went a long way towards both uniquely defining each level while also tying the world together. This time around, all of the hub areas are themed after times of day. A neat enough concept, but the levels themselves don't really tie into those themes in any meaningful way as far as I can tell. The levels don't even all take place in the specified time of day. For example, in Midday Garden's Spooky Swamp clearly takes place during the night. This sort of theming disconnect was also present in Spyro 2, but it made up for it by having each level sort of paired with another level. Basically, NPCs from one level would be connected in some way to NPCs from another level, and the enemies of those levels would usually be related in some way as well. This pairing is completely absent from Year of the Dragon, which unfortunately makes the world feel less like one complete setting, and more like many disparate settings that Spyro is traveling to. There are a few new additions that do help the world feel a bit more connected. The portals to each level within the hub areas are all themed after the level. It's like there's a small piece of each connected level in the hub, which is really neat. Also, when you finish a level, one of the NPCs from that level will come into the hub to help secure or construct a form of transportation that will take Spyro to the next hub. Seeing all of those NPCs working together in some way does feel like a very satisfying reward for making your way through the related set of levels, so maybe disparate is a bit too harsh of a word. I do like these additions, they're solid changes, but I still definitely felt like Spyro 2 provided a setting that felt more connected. The story of individual levels also took a bit of a hit. The intro and outro videos for each level are completely gone. For those of you who don't know, each level in Spyro 2 had a brief intro and outro video that in some way addressed the NPCs, enemies, and/or problem that would be present in the level. They were usually comedic, though sometimes they were also kind of cute or even heartwarming. I liked them a lot. They helped set the tone for each level and gave a specific unique reward for completing each level. That said, each of the Year of the Dragon levels do still have an interesting problem to solve. This always ultimately involves getting to the end of the level in some way, but in one level you might be trying to figure out what's wrong with the bellows that create clouds, while in another you might be trying to put a stop to the outlawed dinosaurs that have taken over an Old West town. It does a lot to keep things fresh, interesting, and engaging. They're all really inventive and fun concepts. It was always a delight to go through a new portal to see what crazy concept the next bit of platforming would be contextualized by. And along with that, each normal level also features different races of NPCs, as well as visually and often mechanically distinct enemies. The music is wonderfully crafted to fit each level as well. It usually comes off as a bit poppy and lighthearted. It's a wonderful addition to an amazing soundscape that made me both feel like I was playing a comedic cartoon and going on a grand adventure. The biggest improvement to the world building this time around comes in the form of the threat and impact of the sorceress and her multifaceted army of Rhinox. Rhinox are present in almost every normal level with differing outfits and equipment, doing a wide variety of things. By the way, if you haven't noticed already, the reason they're called Rhinox is because they're rhino people. It's clever. But the point is, they're occupying and/or causing problems for the residents of these levels. It feels like an invasive, oppressive force, and yes, the tone is pretty light and comedic for the most part, but that doesn't mean the antagonist doesn't feel like a threat. Rhinox are a fucking problem that needs to be dealt with. They're not always directly causing the issues in each level, but they're usually contributing to it in some capacity. It reminds me very much of how the Norks in the first game were an omnipresent threat. Well, maybe not a threat, but definitely a problematic presence to be dealt with. It's a good way to make the conflict of the story present throughout every level, no matter what you're actually doing in any specific level. Fittingly enough, the NPCs mention the sorceress and the Rhinox fairly often, citing the problems they've caused or are actively causing, and colorfully expressing disdain for the self-imposed tyrant. So that covers the sorceress's forces causing problems throughout the Forgotten Worlds, but she and Bianca also interact with Spyro more directly throughout the game. Most of the bosses that you go up against are made specifically to kill Spyro, and there's always a neat little cutscene of their creation that always features a conversation between the sorceress and Bianca that serves to characterize both of them. I always appreciate some insight on the villains, and it at least partially shows what the antagonists are up to while Spyro's busy doing the hero thing, anything, so that's cool. The Sorceress is a more consistently menacing villain than Ripto. She comes off as more competent and malicious and isn't ever the butt of a joke in the scene that she's in. I like that because it makes her out to be much more of a threat to be dealt with. I ultimately liked Ripto more, but both Ripto and Nasty Nork's initial introductions make them look more bumbling than maniacal. The threat in Year of the Dragon feels much more real, which makes Spyro feel like much more of a hero this time around, and that's probably a good thing. Along with those bosses being thrown at Spyro, Bianca also regularly makes appearances throughout the game. She rainbow magics into your face to taunt you. How very gay rights of her. These scenes are one of my favorite things about the game. I absolutely adore when villains taunt the heroes throughout the story. It helps characterize the villain and brings a more personal aspect into the grander conflict. It's a large part of what made GLaDOS and Handsome Jack and Voss villains that I'll remember forever. Bianca's characterization winds up going in a much different direction from them, but I liked that direction quite a lot. Not gonna spoil anything, but through these scenes you get to see what a complex character she is. I love her so very, very much, and I cannot compliment how she was written and performed enough. Kudos to Insomniac and Pamela Hayden for this wonderful character they brought to life.
So, you're the one in charge of rescuing the eggs, huh? How sad. Look here, Dragon. If you know what's good for you, you'll turn around and crawl back up that hole you came through. Those eggs belong to us now, and I've hidden them in places you'll never find in 1,000 years. Besides, even if you could find an egg, our expertly trained armies will dispose of you and take it back. Do I make myself clear? If I find you here again, I am going to be very angry, and you won't like me when I'm angry.
In addition to not being the most receptive to their Rhinoc overlords, and of course talking about the problems in their respective levels, NPCs will sometimes mention little world-building details, mostly tied into magic and how dragons relate to it. It's not exactly enough to fill a lore book, but it's nice to get little world-building bits like that. Those details also tie into the main plot, which adds a bit more nuance to the conflict presented in the story. Like, the Sorceress is still obviously cartoonishly evil, but her plan at least makes sense. There's a couple of small nods to characters from the previous games spread throughout Year of the Dragon, but the most prominent returning character is Hunter. He once again joins Spyro throughout the adventure, appearing regularly throughout the levels to provide side objectives, as well as being a consistent presence in the actual main story. It's good that Spyro has someone to talk to when things are happening. I kind of wish Allura filled the role that Hunter does, not because I love Hunter less, but that I love Allura more. Still, Hunter is once again a fun character, an absolute himbo with the best of intentions who doesn't always think things through. He's a good bean and a fun character. Unless we count the antagonist, there's not really another character with a consistent presence throughout the narrative, except for Sparks and Zoe, of course. Can't forget them. Oh, also, cutscenes have a weird loading screen. It's like a watercolor image of the upcoming cutscene with the title of the cutscene displayed at the bottom. I kind of wish these just didn't exist. Possibly due to the low resolution, they look really, really bad to me, and also the title being present can spoil the contents of the cutscene. There's not a whole lot of story here, so it's really irritating that the game sometimes decides to just spoil its own story content. Please don't do that. The core gameplay is the same as the previous game. It's a mascot platformer, so obviously Spyro can jump. He's a dragon with wings, so pressing the jump button again while in the air causes Spyro to glide. You can control Spyro as he drifts to the ground, and that glide is key to navigating pretty much every level in the game. Pressing triangle while gliding gives Spyro an extra little hover, ending the glide. This greatly lowers his forward momentum while giving a vertical boost to get onto ledges that would be just out of reach for a normal glide, while also allowing for greater control over Spyro's movement. It was a wonderful addition in 2, and it still feels great here. For combat, Spyro can breathe fire, which does a brief damage cone in front of the cute purple boy, as well as a charge that causes Spyro to run at a faster, harder to control speed, horns first, and damage anything that he charges into. Armored enemies cannot be flamed, large enemies can't be charged. The unlockable abilities from Ripto's Rage make a return, and this time are available from the start. It's nice to not have to go back to a more limited moveset in the sequel. Samus, as much as I love you, you really need to stop tripping and dropping your your power-ups at the start of seemingly every adventure. Spyro's moves being available from the start makes it seem like he's actually improved from his previous game, which is really neat. Those returning moves are climbing, which lets Spyro climb up certain surfaces in a similar vein to Assassin's Creed or Uncharted. The head bash, which is a head-first ground pound that can destroy certain obstacles and damage enemies that you can perform by pressing triangle while in the air and not in a glide state. And swimming, which has a unique control scheme. If you push the charge button while on the surface of the water, Spyro will dive down, then the movement buttons will cause Spyro's orientation to change, still a very progressive feature for the time. Pushing the jump button will cause Spyro to slowly accelerate in the direction he's pointed, while holding the charge button causes Spyro to swim much faster, and damage anything that gets in his way. Fire Breath doesn't work underwater because of course it doesn't, and there's no pesky timer to worry about while swimming, so you can explore to your heart's content. I actually had fun controlling it, which is a nice change of pace from most games where any underwater sections just feel like a chore. Ice physics also exist. There are specific sections where ice covers the ground, you can't jump or charge, and Spyro kind of skates around on his claws. I actually really like how it feels. I liked it a bit more in Spyro 2. I think it was a bit faster maybe, but it's still a fun way to move as far as I'm concerned. Ever the faithful companion, Sparks the Dragonfly functions as Spyro's health indicator, changing colors as you get hit and disappearing when you're a single hit from death. Dying means you lose a life. I never got anywhere near a game over, but apparently that just knocks you out of the current level, which isn't really a big deal. Killing a wide variety of small innocent creatures scattered throughout each level will spawn a butterfly that Sparks will eat. This restores a hit point because video game mechanics. Yes, this is a traumatizing experience still, despite the fact that I've done it probably 100 times at this point throughout the 3 games. Sparks also helps out by zipping over to grab nearby gems because he's a wonderful friend, except when he's taken so many hits for Spyro that he has to go take a break. What an absolute legend. What an absolute legend. Though he did... What an absolute legend!
It's a bit too much.
Yeah. What an absolute fucking legend.
Oh my god.
There we go. Perfect now. Though he did lose an ability, sort of. He can't point at the nearest gem anymore, at least not from the start. You have to unlock that ability instead later on. It does feel kind of bad to lose access to this ability, but I like the way it's implemented, which I'll talk about a bit later in the video. The camera controls are tied to the shoulder buttons because that era of gaming was apparently forsaken by every conceivable form of higher power. It's fine. Dated for sure, but fine. I was pretty much used to this type of camera controls by the end of Spyro 2, but they never felt anywhere near as intuitive as just using the right analog stick. There is an option you can toggle that makes the camera start to orient behind Spyro when he starts to move. I heavily advise turning this on. Thinking on it now, there was probably some GameCube games I played when I was a child that had similar controls, but the familiarity with them just didn't stick with me at all. You can also push a button to go into a mode where Spyro stops moving and you can look all around. This is also used to aim projectiles because Spyro can pop rocks into his mouth and shoot them at enemies. If you have the Super Flame power-up, you can also aim shots in this way. Power-up gates return from Spyro 2, but they're not tied to enemy kills in any way. There are way fewer of them, and they're just available from the start. Passing through one of these temporarily adds to Spyro's moveset or abilities in some way. I already mentioned the Super Flame, which changes Spyro's flame breath into a fireball with longer range that ignores enemy immunities and can destroy chests that Spyro normally can't affect. Super Flight allows Spyro to temporarily fly. It basically functions the same as gliding, but you don't slowly fall and can move vertically. It feels really good to have such unrestricted mobility. There's also a power-up that combines the two, and a power-up that makes Spyro invincible, which allows him to traverse certain areas that he otherwise couldn't, and also survive the end of days. There's nothing new to Year of the Dragon here, but they're all welcome returns. Also, there's one level that gives Spyro Ice Breath, which is a neat twist on his normal moveset. It's a damage cone like the Fire Breath, but if it connects with something, that thing becomes frozen, which means you have a period of time where you can charge to finish enemies off, or you can use those frozen entities as platforms. I kind of wish there were more levels that took advantage of this mechanic, or if it was somehow a permanent upgrade that you could use to get collectibles in other levels, sort of like the unlockable moves from 2, but oh well, still a neat thing. So once again, the game is based around hub areas. I mentioned before that they're themed after times of day, which is actually a theme I like quite a bit, but again, it doesn't really affect the rest of the game in any meaningful way, so The hub areas have collectibles, NPCs, and a power-up gate, but no enemies. They're a nice, laid-back change of pace from the normal levels that isn't as extreme of a change as the side objectives for eggs. They're simple and laid back, and I like that. These hubs contain themed portals to a set of levels, as well as a form of transportation that will take you to the next hub, and can also be used to travel to any other unlocked hubs later. Traveling through these portals will whisk Spyro away to a variety of weird, wonderful, whimsical lands that he must platform and battle through, while also collecting tons and tons of stuff. Fun, fun, fun. Most levels have an NPC near the start who will explain a problem and ask Spyro for help with solving it. There's a very nice synergy between what you're being asked to do in each level, what the level actually is, what the NPCs are, the types of enemies that you're going up against in each level, and the tasks you're asked to do in side areas for additional collectibles. For an example, let's look at my favorite level, Dino Mines. Dino Mines is a level inspired by the Old West. The Sheriff Bunny and his bunny subordinates, they're so cute, are embroiled in a conflict with a gang of dinosaur bandits who are also absolutely adorable. The bandits have taken over and imprisoned the sheriff in the jail, so your primary goal in this level is to free him. The enemies throughout this level are mostly those dinosaur bandits. The side areas have you dealing with the bandits, who are probably working for the sorceress, as well as chasing down a collectible that was thrown into a flooded mine by one of the dinosaur bandits. It's a fun, original idea that organically branches out into all of the aspects of gameplay. And all of the normal levels are designed like this. It's well thought out, and I was constantly excited to see what the next unique location I'd be adventuring through would be. The levels tend to be more wide open to take advantage of Spyro's gliding, and have a lot of nooks and crannies to explore for collectibles. Exploring levels feels both organic and rewarding, though there is a change from Spyro 2 that I'm not fond of. In Spyro 2, the side objectives that gave a special collectible type would be spread throughout and integrated into the level. Now they're all behind portals that warp you to a new area, very much still in line with the theme of the area, where you participate in the side objective. It's by no means bad, and it allows for some crazier side objectives, for better or for worse, but there was a certain magic to stumbling across an NPC who asked for help, which is now no longer present, when I know for a fact that those same types of NPCs are all going to be behind portals. By the way, the only level that I just out and out did not like was Lost Fleet. One of the primary gimmicks in the level is that the water is acidic, which means you need an invulnerability power-up to swim through it. This might as well be temporarily adding an air mechanic to the underwater sections, which is what I would call a fun ruiner, because it ruined my fun. Generally, the difficulty of the game is pretty low, making it a pretty relaxing play, but this was instead panic-inducing and inconveniently annoying considering there's only a single power-up gate in the main part of the level. It made exploring stressful rather than enjoyable, and considering that exploring each level is one of the main things that you're doing, that's pretty damning. Though even that level has interesting and unique theming. The enemies are as widely varied as the levels. In terms of appearance at the very least, every level has unique enemies. Many of them share or have rather similar movesets, but they provide a solid variety both in terms of appearance and gameplay. Rhinox will be dressed up and equipped to fit whatever level they're invading, while other enemies will be locals of that particular level, though that doesn't make them any less hostile. The core of combat remains the same as in the first two games. Spyro's Flame Breath can't hit armored enemies, and his charge can't hurt large ones. With those two rules established, enemies have a wide variety of behaviors and attacks that makes dealing with them interesting and at times challenging. Playing aggressively will usually serve you well, especially early on, but sometimes you need to bide your time and avoid an attack before going in for the kill. Again, the game is not usually particularly difficult. Once you've seen an enemy a few times, you'll probably know how to deal with it pretty consistently, but then you'll likely be asked to deal with that enemy in combination with other enemies. Near the end of the game, this can occasionally get pretty dicey, but it's the exception, not the rule. There are also optional levels in the form of speedways. Compared to Spyro 2, there are some differences and additions, mostly for the better, but there is one aspect that feels like a step back. You're rewarded for engaging with these levels with Dragon Eggs, a collectible that we'll get into in more detail later on. There's 1 speedway per hub, so there's 4 total, with 3 objectives that each reward 1 egg. Numbers. Sparks actually talks to you as you enter these levels in like a cute voice that basically makes it impossible to understand what he's saying. Like, he is saying words, but we'll just call that an incredibly heavy accent. I fucking love Sparks. I'm glad he gets to talk now. Speedways are levels where Spyro is always flying. If the explanation still holds up from Spyro 1, that's because of magic. It's basically flying in the same way as when Spyro has a super flight power-up, it just doesn't end. Landing on the ground causes Spyro to supercharge, gotta go fast. It does feel slightly different to the flight in Spyro 2, but my skill carried over pretty well. There's 2 activities that Sparks lists for Spyro to do. There's Time Attack, which is very close to the activity from the Ripto's Rage circuit of speedways. Spyro has to complete 4 sets of objectives, things like flying through rings or killing enemies. Completing these objectives gives gems. We'll get to those very, very soon, I promise. And completing all of them in a single run gives an additional amount of gems, as well as an egg. Goodies upon goodies. A big part of the fun of these bits in Spyro 2 was plotting out a course through the level to grab all the objectives without hitting the time limit. This isn't really a problem this time. Sparks straight up tells you an easy order to do the objectives in, and they flow very easily into one another every single time. Maybe there's a thing such as being too helpful, Sparks. The speedways weren't my favorite part of Spyro 2, but I did still enjoy them. All of the time attacks in Year of the Dragon feel much, much easier than those in Ripto's Rage, and Spyro 1 for that matter. These bits are still enjoyable, just laughably easy, whereas they could absolutely provide a decent challenge in previous entries. Then there's an addition that I wound up enjoying much more than I expected to. Races. You fly around the speedway racing a couple of NPCs, you fly through a sequence of rings that act as the track, and there are also blue stars on the course that can give you a brief, very strong speed boost, and red stars that give you a homing rocket to fire at your opponents. It's a very sportsman-like move, launching a ballistic missile at your competition super above board. Spyro can also flame his opponents if he gets near them, slowing them down. What type of racer Spyro is up against varies based on the speedway, and each individual racer follows a unique route insofar as going through specific boosts. It's really neat, and it's an activity that I had a lot of fun with. I enjoy the flying in Spyro, and since this is essentially a test of how well you can fly, I enjoyed that challenge. It's not fucked hard, but you do have to learn the course and consistently hit boosts if you want to win and get those dragon eggs. I actually kind of wish there were a few more races, or that this was a franchise staple from the start. I definitely enjoyed them more than the time attacks in any of the games. Finally, the secret objectives return. Kind of. They're not listed on the Sparks menu because they're secret. Words mean things. Keeping in that spirit, I won't be talking about these. At least not now. I'll delve into it later in the video, because of reasons. On to those glorious, glorious collectibles. I wish I could confidently say that it wouldn't be a Spyro game without gems, but honestly, with how I've heard the franchise win over time, I wouldn't be surprised if there actually were Spyro games without gems. I know at least Skylanders doesn't have gems, and Spyro's in the name of the first one of those. This was supposed to be a joke, but now I'm just sad about the future of Spyro. Again. Damn it. My now looming depressive episode aside, gems are the most common collectible in Year of the Dragon. You can find them scattered all over the ground, indestructible objects, and from a few other sources. This time around, enemies return to dropping gems instead of killing them being tied to unlocking power-up gates. I much prefer how Spyro 2 handled this because it differentiated killing enemies from the collectibles in the level and gave me a better sense of progression within an individual level. Collecting gems is still a wonderfully satisfying experience. Sparks zipping over to grab them when Spyro gets near makes it a generally hassle-free process, and as ever, it sounds amazing. In terms of completion, I really like them because it makes me feel like I'm making consistent progress on a long-term overarching goal as I just make my way through each level. There's a lot of them, and collecting them was always fun to me. They're also laid out in such a way as to guide you naturally through the level. They're unintrusive and clever design. It also makes thematic sense that a dragon would be hoarding gems, which isn't necessarily necessary, but is nice. There is another returning NPC who appears consistently throughout the levels, aside from Hunter. I just hesitate to call him an ally. Moneybags, the greedy, capitalistic bear, once again acts as a regular progression blocker, asking, nay, extorting Spyro for portions of his hard-collected hoard. Basically, Moneybags serves as a mechanical use for collecting gems beyond just the sake of collection. He blocks progress in some instances, or seals off side objectives in others, until you pay whatever arbitrary price he sets. It is a collectathon, and the game wants to be sure that you're actually collecting at least some things. In Spyro 2, he was opportunistic and greedy, but it still felt like he was on Team Hero. That's very much not the case this time. He's regularly being paid to work for the sorceress or her minions, and only makes an exception for Spyro if he pays enough money. Not only does he block progress, but he also actively imprisons a few people awaiting execution. Like, he's just a fucking villain now. At first, the richer sign may seem somewhat benevolent, kind even, but give him an opportunity to make more money, and he'll go full evil, if he thinks he can get away with it, which obviously he does, because he's a fool. When he's
Fucking fool of a bear!
Fool of a bear that you are, padding your pockets with the money of the enemy. Fuck. When he's not literally working for the antagonist, he's inventing problems to scam Spyro out of more money. For fuck's sake, there's an instance of him selling you scalped tickets for a competition that he's a judge in. I didn't read him any different this time, a criticism of either capitalism in general, or how the rich act under capitalism, always trying to get richer, even to the point of full-on evil. It's a critique I'm here for, and Moneybags absolutely occupies the spot of the kind of character I love to hate. I despise everything that he stands for as a person, and would sooner jump out of a window than spend time with him more than is absolutely necessary, but he's also written really, really well.
Is jammed shut. Only the power of gems can hope to move it.
Many NPCs have rejection dialogue for when you say no to their requests. Most of it's super well written and worth your time, but all of my favorites are from Moneybags. I'd advise experiencing all of them. I mentioned before that when you clear each level, one of the NPCs from that level will travel to the hub to help Spyro get some form of transportation to the next hub area. Obviously, these are NPCs, not collectibles, but they do serve the same mechanical function as the Talisman collectibles from Spyro 2, that being a way of ensuring that you actually finish most, if not all, of the levels in a hub before moving on to the next one. Obviously, you don't actually have to do all the egg objectives and grab all the gems, but getting these NPCs to help you out stops you from being able to just walk to the last areas of the game. So there can be an actual difficulty curve in the level design, which is a good thing. Finally, there's the most interesting collectible, dragon eggs. If you're familiar with Spyro 2, they're basically the replacement for orbs, though they're a bit more prosperous and directly plot relevant. The portals to some levels won't be activated until you've collected enough dragon eggs, because magic, which is actually a plot relevant detail, so hey, fair enough. Collecting an egg causes the egg to hatch, and then the newly born baby dragon does a cute little animation. Most of these are repeated, but there are a handful of unique ones. Then the baby dragon teleports away to safety, presumably to the dragon worlds. Hooray. Some are just found in hidden bits of the environment, you get one for clearing every level, and then there's the bit that makes them the interesting collectible. Every level has 2 to 3 bonus areas you can go to that reward an egg for completing a challenge, activity, or like side quest of some kind. I'm just gonna call them egg objectives for clarity's sake. You walk through a magical portal, but like a different kind from the ones that lead to levels from hub areas, and then you're in the associated new area. There's usually an NPC to provide direction of some kind. Some of these areas also have more than one egg. The most straightforward of these use Spyro's normal moveset, maybe with a perspective change or with aspects of Spyro's moveset taken away, or with some sort of slight variation on that moveset. For the most part, your skill in the normal levels will carry over to these relatively smoothly, and many of them feel like a test of a certain aspect of gameplay. For example, there's a rail shooter section where you're given a super flame power-up and can't move, or a game of cat hockey where you're freezing cats, then herding them towards scratching posts, which is absolutely adorable, but not as fun as the normal hockey minigame from 2, in my opinion. These are pretty much on par with what you could expect from the side activities in Spyro 2 in terms of content. I liked pretty much all of them, once again, with the exception of the one where you have to protect the ice skater and the Jack and the Beanstalk inspired section where you're planting and platforming on mushrooms and flowers. For the ice skating one, I felt like I didn't have time to react to enemies rushing in because the camera angle was so close and the ice physics don't let you move incredibly fast. Basically, I just memorized the pattern of enemies with Lily's help, and for the Jack and the Beanstalk one, jumping off the mushrooms in just the right way felt awkward. They're supposed to function like springs, and you have to time your jump off of them to jump as high as possible. Even when I did it correctly, the visual and auditory feedback just wasn't at all satisfying, which is surprising considering how excellent the animations and sound effects are for most of the game. But aside from those two, these activities go a long way towards adding variety to the game. I very much like them in Spyro 2, and I feel the same in Year of the Dragon. That said, there are more additions to these egg objectives in Year of the Dragon that provide much more variety and are much more experimental. Their quality just isn't as consistent, and while some of them are really fun, some others can be a slog to get through. Spyro can hop into or onto a variety of vehicles. Most of them feel unwieldy or awkward to control, and honestly, I just don't think it's a particularly interesting or fitting direction for Spyro to go in. Maybe Banjo Nuts and Bolts left a particularly sour taste in my mouth. I don't know. If they were more consistently enjoyable to control, I'm sure I'd be singing their praises, but it be what it is, and what it is isn't great. The speedboat is probably the one that I had the worst experience with. Thankfully, it only shows up once, kind of. It functions sort of like swimming, but without being able to move on the vertical axis. You orient the speedboat, then hit the acceleration button to move forward. It's fast. It actually feels kind of good in the very brief section where the camera moves as you turn. But the primary focus of the speedboat section is a mini-boss where the camera is locked on. The turning of the speedboat is based on the orientation of the vehicle, not the camera, like the rest of the game. I consistently ran into walls or turned in ways that I didn't intend to. It didn't take too long to actually beat the boss, but even when I did it correctly, it felt terrible, which sucks. The tank is slow. It moves slowly, it fires slowly, it contemplates life decisions slowly. It orients in the same way as the speedboat, but the camera is never locked, so that aspect is fine. You have two types of shots. Straight, no thanks, I'm gay, and lob. The sections with the tank have environmental obstacles that can block shots. It's not awful like the speedboat, I just didn't find it particularly fun. The submarine is actually fine in terms of controls. It's pretty close to swimming, though it feels a bit more precise. Momentum matters less for your turning, you're constantly accelerating at least a bit, and you have buttons that can make you go faster. You have missiles that can lock onto enemies. Basically, you have to keep an enemy in sight for a little bit, then the targeting reticules turn red, and your shot will home in on that enemy. The objective associated with the submarine is more annoying than the vehicle itself, honestly. You always just have to kill all the enemies that are running away from you. The harder ones can be going pretty quickly and turn pretty aggressively. Getting a lock-on on those took a bit, and even after I got a lock-on, the torpedoes would often hit walls while trying to home in on the enemy. Doesn't feel great, but I still mostly had fun with this one. Finally, there's the very clear evidence that this game is a product of the 90s, despite coming out in 2000, which does, logically speaking, mean that it was probably made at least partially in the 90s, so I'm still right, even if I'm wrong. The most frequently occurring and, objectively speaking, radical vehicle in the game, the skateboard. or Squidboard if you use a cheat code, so don't be alarmed by the existence of squid in this footage. I have such weirdly mixed feelings about it. You have constant forward momentum on the skateboard. Spyro can still use his flames, and Spyro can jump. In normal skateboarding sections, there's two types of jumps you can do. Ramps launch you forward off of them if you time your jump correctly, whereas half pipes launch you up. You can do tricks while in the air. I guess they're adjacent to tricks. Off of a half pipe, you can spin. It locks you into this state until you hit the ground again. It feels solid enough, but I do have one pretty significant problem with it. You have to orient Spyro towards the half pipe in order to not wipe out. I'm not super familiar with how skateboarding works in real life, but I did play a lot of Tony Hawk games, and that wasn't a problem in those. You have gotta learn your reverts, Spyro, come on. I definitely had to fight against my instincts when learning how the system worked. Off of other jumps, you can hold the triangle button to enter a trick state where you can roll. Spyro can roll in any direction, including diagonals. Initially, I thought these spin tricks felt terrible. They seemed to proc pretty inconsistently. I'd clearly roll multiple times in the air, and very few of the tricks would actually register, especially when I tried to do diagonal rolls. What seemed to be happening is that if a roll was at all unaligned, or if the movement was ever stopped before a roll was completed, it wouldn't count. It's a rather strict system, and because there's only tricks associated with the 4 basic directions and diagonals, whenever my roll would deviate from that in the slightest, it didn't seem to count. Side note, there's strangely only 2 sets of tricks associated with the diagonals, so there are lemon and lime diagonals, which is an inherently silly concept that seems even more ridiculous to actually vocalize. I kind of love it. There is actually a solution I found to this that made tricks actually seem to register much more consistently. I used the D-pad to move during skateboard sections instead of the left stick, which meant that my inputs were much more precise. Obviously, it would be preferable if it was just a bit less strict so the stick would work, but with the major caveat of needing to use the D-pad instead, it does feel pretty alright. I had fun with it, but there were some minor annoyances that made the whole experience less enjoyable than it otherwise could have and should have been. It's pretty easy to crash, even when you're not trying to do a trick. While it is possible to bounce off of walls you come into contact with, I found myself crashing much more often, and landing tricks required quite a bit of learning curve to get the momentum and placement just right. Even near the end of the game, I still found myself crashing pretty often. There are basically 2 types of sections with the skateboard, and crashing is an annoying setback in both. There's little skate park areas that are more open-ended and exploratory. They usually have an egg objective of some kind, and then an additional bit where there's a score to beat with tricks. Doing new tricks in a run gives you more points than just repeating tricks you've already done, which is neat. At any rate, on these levels there are various skateboard power-up things located around the map, and you have to walk into one of these to actually get onto a skateboard. When you crash on one of these maps, your skateboard breaks, which means you need to go pick up a new one, which takes time. And most of the egg objectives here are timed. I just kind of wish there was some downtime and then you got on a new skateboard instead of needing to run over to a pickup. The distance to the nearest one can vary pretty wildly, and it's just not an enjoyable experience to have to go get a new one. The other major section type for skateboards are the races. There are races against NPCs as well as time trials. There are no half pipes on these stages, and doing tricks as you rush through the stage fills up a boost meter instead of giving you points. As you can probably guess, this meter can be used to make you go very fast, and in some instances allows you to reach parts of the track that you otherwise couldn't. Of course, if you mess up a trick and crash, you don't get any boost, and there's a bit of downtime before you're automatically put on a new board. This also kills most of the momentum that you would have. It can feel like a pretty harsh setback, but it makes enough sense for the gameplay that that part doesn't bother me. The problem is that if you don't have any boost, the tracks become much more difficult to get around, which makes it harder to get tricks off, so it can wind up being a cascading series of failures. On particularly hard races, I would very often just reset if I crashed a single time, which pretty much sucked. Also, the flight races are just more fun, so I would have preferred to have more of those instead of these. Despite the issues I had, I enjoyed all of the skate park sections, and I enjoyed most of the racing sections up until it became so difficult that any mistake started to feel like a failed run. They were a fun distraction, unlike most of the other vehicle sections, though there was definitely an undercurrent of me just wanting to go play a Tony Hawk game during these bits, which isn't an entirely fair comparison, but was what I was legitimately feeling, so... The other big egg objective addition comes in the form of animal companions, or I guess just companions? Because they can talk, so they're just people? Or calling them animals is redundant because Spyro is also an animal, I guess? Whatever, they're other playable characters with their own movesets, which is a really awesome idea and varies wildly in quality the whole way through. I mentioned before that Moneybags is often imprisoning people for the sorceress. That's how you initially unlock, or I guess befriend these characters, paying Moneybags off. And they all won their way into my heart very quickly because they always immediately inflict completely justified violence upon his money-grabbing ass. When you initially free them, it also unlocks their introductory/tutorial level, which is required to progress to the next hub, and after finishing that, their associated egg objective sections unlock throughout the rest of the game. Sparks travels with them, so health and grabbing gems works the same, but aside from that, they're all pretty different, so I'm just going to talk through each of them in greater detail. First up is Sheila, the kangaroo. She speaks with an Australian accent because of course she does. She's kind of laid back, though still very eager to help kick the Rhinox to the curb. Literally, her primary attack is a kick. She also has a normal jump and two forms of special jumps. There's the air hop, where she jumps again in the air, and the double jump. For the double jump, you have to push the jump button again as Sheila lands a jump. The double jump is a bit more difficult to use, but sends Sheila much higher, while it's easier to maintain forward momentum with an air hop. Sheila can also do a ground pound, similar to Spyro's head bash. Sheila's reduced range compared to Spyro made her feel much more vulnerable in terms of combat. I found myself playing much more cautiously, letting enemies come to me instead of rushing them down. Thinking on it now, I probably should have just employed the ground pound more, but oh well, it was still fun. Platforming with Sheila is fun too, and much more vertically based compared to Spyro's. It's a nice change of pace. There tend to be some hidden areas that require the double jump that are rather hard to see from ground level. Scouring a level for one of these can be annoying because you have to stop and look around for them with the look around mode thing. Sheila's definitely the other playable character that feels the closest to Spyro. Actual movement feels very similar. That's not a complaint, just an observation. Sheila does have a sort of gimmick level that's 2D. There's not really any mechanical changes. The camera just changes perspectives and your range of movement is limited to 2 dimensions. It doesn't really feel great because, surprisingly enough, movement systems between 2D and 3D platformers tend to be different. Her movement has more startup than you might otherwise expect from a 2D thing, which makes sense when you're looking at her from behind, but feels clunky when looking at her from the side. I just didn't like this section. Also, Sheila has a section that's an escort mission, which is tedious and boring because the people you're escorting almost seem to purposefully swerve into problems to trick you into failing. Feels bad. I failed it so many times that the game's adaptive difficulty kicked in and started taking obstacles away, which felt especially bad, but I also hated the section, so I'm not entirely sure how the adaptive difficulty works, but if you fail enough, you can enter a state where you're locked into easy mode, and the game becomes less difficult. It doesn't display this, so after I noticed this happening, just to be safe, I entered the cheat code that's supposed to put it back onto the normal difficulty. Aside from those bits, Sheila's sections are pretty fun. Next up is Sergeant James Bird. He's a penguin. From the name, I assumed he was a parody of James Bond, but he's actually a more traditional type of military character. He does speak in a British accent, though. Also, he's armed with shoulder-mounted rocket launchers. Cool. Those rocket launchers are his primary attack. They have very slight homing. The shots alternate which launcher they come out of, which can and does affect how you need to aim to hit enemies. Also, as you've probably seen, Sergeant Bird can fly. I'm glad he's overcome his flightless bird status with sheer willpower. It's fucking impressive. This flight feels pretty bad. You can hold the jump button to ascend and let go to start falling. The way that momentum affects how you move in all directions while flying as Bird feels very loose. You can also pick up certain objects while flying, including bombs. Sergeant Bird, the carpet-bombing penguin. Fiction certainly is something, isn't it? While flying, you can look down with triangle, which is an appreciated feature considering you sometimes need to hit specific targets with the dropped objects. Even once I understood how it worked, it was never particularly enjoyable. An unfortunately recurring trend for the not great parts of the game. It wasn't terrible by any means, and the levels that Bird goes through are interesting. I especially love those French hummingbird soldiers in his intro level, but I would have preferred normal Spyro content to these, unfortunately. The only outright awful section with Bird is a sort of survival arena where you have to kill waves of enemies. I found it to be a legitimately challenging gauntlet, and the problems I had with the controls became much less bearable in a context where I was being asked to do something difficult with them. By the way, fuck that last wave. The floor becomes untouchable and the enemies, despite being the exact same type as the previous waves, get new attacks. This was very upsetting to me. Next up is Bentley, my personal favorite of the new playable characters. He's a Yeti. Good start. He's a heavy type character. Big, strong, slow. Despite that, he's actually rather intelligent, verbose, and kind. He's a good boy, and I love him. He's not only my favorite in terms of characterization, but also gameplay. Like I said, he moves slower, which could have been awful, but instead the game actually made me feel powerful. The hitbox on his giant club is massive, and crushing enemies with it felt super satisfying. Where I was playing pretty cautiously with Sheila, I was actually being much more aggressive with Bentley. Bentley can also spin his club around to deflect projectiles, which is sometimes required for progression. I really enjoyed rampaging through his normal gameplay sections, but two of his sections are rather different. There's one where he plays whack-a-mole, as in moles are digging out of the ground near him and you have to hit a certain amount within a time limit, but there are also gnomes digging around because if you fail to kill enough fast enough or hit a single gnome, you have to start over. The problems with this bit are simple but infuriating. Chasing moles while controlling such a slow character just kind of sucks, and also Bentley's club can absolutely clip a gnome while you're aiming for a mole. It's like it's designed to be annoying. Then there's the infamous Yeti boxing. One of Bentley's sections is entirely different. It's a boxing minigame, obviously based on the name. His little brother had his ball stolen, and you need to beat up the Yeti who stole it. It's a very simple fighting game-esque bit. If you do nothing, you block low hits, you have a fast jab that hits high, a body blow that hits low, a heavy haymaker that hits high, and you can choose to block high. It took a bit to figure out how I should play it, but I sort of wound up playing a simple footsie game and tagging the evil Yeti with haymakers. And since I had more health when the time ran out, I won. If you're not familiar with fighting game terminology, footsies are when you and your opponent sort of move back and forth trying to tag each other with longer range simple hits. It can, and very often does, get more complicated than that, but it definitely fucking doesn't in Yeti boxing. But yeah, might be my experience with fighting games showing, but I didn't have much trouble with it. It was fine, I guess. Agent 9 is a really fun idea for a character that has aged incredibly poorly. The characterization is great. A crazy, laser gun-toting, talking monkey. He's very hyper, maybe a little bit crazy, and very eager to blast some Rhinox. His outfit reminds me of Marvin the Martian, which is a cute reference. Gameplay-wise, Agent 9's sections are all shooters. The controls are universal for these, but each of his sections is meant to be an homage to a different kind of shooter. Agent 9 can move and jump, of course, and his primary method of attack is his laser gun. One tap of the circle button equals one super hot laser flying in the relative direction of the enemy. See, the first section for Agent 9 is a third-person shooter, with no aiming reticule unless you stop and look around with the first-person mode that disables movement to aim shots. There are certainly sections where you're meant to stop and aim. He even has a mechanic where he can zoom in while aiming, but there definitely feels like there are also sections where you're supposed to run and gun, which meant just sort of feeling out where shots would go, which fucking sucked. The controls don't really translate well to aiming precisely at enemies while moving. Orienting the character properly and dealing with the dated camera controls without being able to tell exactly where you're aiming is an unfun combo, and my solution was pretty much to rush enemies down while mashing the attack button. There is an additional way that Agent 9 can move that helps mitigate this by at least a little bit. He can strafe with R1 and L1, definitely a welcome addition that made the experience something resembling bearable, but it doesn't do enough to make this section actually feel particularly fun. There's also grenades you can pick up that can be lobbed at enemies and things in the environment with the square button. Holding the button allows you to precisely aim the grenades, which is fine for like chests or whatever in the environment, but it sucks for the enemies that you have to use them on because you can't move while aiming them, which for me at least meant I took a hit pretty much every time I tried to use one on an enemy. There's also a sort of top-down shooter section which uses the normal controls. There's a reason things like this usually employ twin-stick controls, and I know this game doesn't use the right stick, but damn it, the DualShock was out by now, just fucking use it! It doesn't feel as bad as the other two sections because movement makes sense and it's relatively easy to figure out where you're actually going to hit, but it doesn't feel great to have to move in order to get your aim just right. It makes getting hit much more likely, which is incredibly unfortunate because this is a survival sequence where you need to get through 5 rooms and it's not easy. Much like the Sergeant Bird arena, it's difficult enough that the shortcomings in the controls become much more detrimental and irritating than they are in the other easier content. There's also a rail shooter, which is a good time actually, especially in comparison to the other Agent 9 sections. I don't really have much more to say about it, it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect it to be. Simple, but fun. Finally, there's a first-person shooter section, which was even worse than the introductory level because of one incredibly simple yet infuriating change to how movement works. Pushing left or right on the stick or D-pad changes the way Agent 9 is facing, and in order to actually move left or right, you have to push the strafe buttons. It makes movement feel incredibly awkward and unintuitive. I think this might actually be the section that I liked the least in the whole game. I like shooters, especially first-person shooters, and seeing this homage just completely miss the mark really bummed me out. It is cool that there's a hidden weapon power-up thing that you can use in this section. The Wolfenstein-esque health indicator is neat, and at least there's a reticule for this bit, so there is more good here than none. But it really just seems like a case of monkey see, monkey do for both this and the third-person shooter section. Either Insomniac didn't understand what made shooters work, which I highly doubt considering they went on to make Ratchet & Clank, or they just didn't put in the work to make it enjoyable. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that it's easy to make shooters or any other type of game, but looking at how bad the controls are for this, I genuinely think the Agent 9 content should have just been cut. Which hurts to say because I think that the character's a fun concept at its core, and I love his line delivery.
Pretty good answer, isn't he? Not much stamina, though. Too bad I had a lot more ammo left. Anyway, I heard all about how you've been fighting the sorceress and her armies and kicking all that butt, and I just wanted to say, huzzah! Yippee! Woohoo! Wish I could stay, but my homeworld's been overrun by Rhinox since I've been captured. If you happen to see the sorceress, tell her I'll be giving her dancing lessons real soon. Know what I mean? You bet. Later!
Might as well talk about it here, even though it's a bit different. There's one other character you can control, Sparks. After beating the boss of each hub, you unlock a Sparks level, which works as a top-down shooter. Kind of wish Agent 9's top-down bit had just aped this more, because these levels are actually really fun. Sparks can turn rather quickly, and holding the circle button lets Sparks shoot. Sparks can also do a bit of a charge, though this doesn't really hurt enemies. It's meant to be used to run away so you can reposition and shoot again. There are keys scattered around each level that you have to find to progress, and each level ends with a boss fight, which are fun and interesting. Only the final Sparks level has a theme that I found to be creative, the rest are pretty simplistic. But it is a fun change of pace that finally lets Sparks take the forefront of the adventure for a bit, which is what he deserves, honestly. It's also really cute that these gyms are so gigantic since Sparks is so itty-bitty compared to Spyro. Clearing these levels also unlocks a new ability for Sparks in the main game, like expanding his gem pickup range or returning his ability to point towards the nearest gym from the previous game. These are just a super solid addition. I deceived you just a bit in that previous section. There's yet another playable character. Remember how I mentioned there were secret side objective things in the speedways? Hunter is hidden somewhere in each of the speedways, and he happens to be caught up in his own subplot. Hunter is fighting to stop an invasion by evil space cows and space sheep and maybe other domesticated farm animals from beyond the stars. This is a reference to Metropolis from Spyro 2, and I really like it. It's super campy and goofy, and it's great. In each speedway, when you take control of Hunter to combat this alien yet familiar threat, he uses different vehicles. There's a rail shooter section, which is decent enough fun, a bit with a plane, which is a bit clunky but pretty solid, a fly through the ring sequence where Hunter is wearing his wings from Spyro 2, yeah, sure, why not, and a speedboat section, which is terrible. Hunter drives the speedboat towards the camera. It's awkward to turn because it's based on the orientation of the boat again, and it turns slowly. You're supposed to jump over and swerve past a bunch of obstacles on a river. If you make too many mistakes, a UFO catches you and you die. The biggest problem is that your jump is so massive that it's very possible that when you come down from a jump, you'll practically be on top of another obstacle, and the turn is so terrible that you probably won't be able to avoid it. It's bad and tedious, and I hate it. But it's only one of the 4 things for Hunter, so overall the Hunter sections are a good time. And their overarching narrative is something that I found so delightfully silly and fun that I can give the terrible boat bit a pass.
Each one of the Hunter sections is a direct reference to one of the Hunter sections from 2.
That's cool.
So he has wings and he's flying through rings. In Spyro 2, you were following him through rings while he had wings.
That's cool.
There was the rail shooter section where you rode on the plane. He gets on the plane for the first one and flies around and shoots things.
Okay, yeah.
There's the one of his that is the rail shooter. He's wearing the jetpack from Metro Speedway.
Yeah.
And the last one is the speedboat, where you're swapping tracks.
Mm-hmm.
The Ice Speedway from 2. You're on a paraglider behind him on a speedboat,
Right.
swapping tracks.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on most of those.
Yeah.
Neat. There are also a couple of other bits where you control Spyro with unique mechanics in those side areas that I think are notable enough to mention here. The Supercharge returns by way of a few tracks where you chase down thieves who have also returned. Makes sense, dragon eggs. I actually liked the Supercharge here, probably because it wasn't a level adapted to have a Supercharge section in it, but these sections uniquely made to take advantage of how you move with the Supercharge. There are also water tunnel sections that are sort of like underwater Supercharge sections. The courses turn you automatically a bit as they curve, which is weird to get used to, but aside from that, I enjoyed them. The final collectible type of thing is skill points. They're handled very similarly to how they were handled in Spyro 2. They're a list of challenges to complete associated with various levels. You don't actually get to see the list until you've hit credits, but you can unlock them at any time. There's time trials, destroying sets of objects and environments, performing well on certain side objectives, clearing set scores on skate park sections, things like that. When you proc a skill point, you get healed to full and gain an extra life. I actually purposefully used that to heal in the Sergeant Bird arena section, cause it's fucked. They're fun enough to go after, and just like in Spyro 2, each one adds an additional bit to an epilogue that you gain access to after you beat the final boss, usually a little joke that acts as a follow-up on a character in the game. It's cute, fun, and rewarding. I did run into one issue while trying to get the skill points though. There's one for winning the Yeti boxing minigame in 2 rounds or less. When I replayed the minigame to try to get the skill point, the other Yeti just didn't do anything, and I could knock him out easily. Apparently, this is a notoriously difficult skill point to get, and when I looked around online, I couldn't find a single thing about this, so I guess I just got a ridiculously rare glitch. I kinda wish I got to try it legit, and yes, it kept happening even after resetting the game and trying to load into it again. Not the biggest deal, but still weird and a bummer. The boss fights are once again a fun time with one notable exception. You're taken to a boss area when you first ride one of the vehicles prepared for Spyro in the hub areas. I mentioned before that a cutscene plays that shows a conversation between the sorceress and Bianca. This also shows the creation of the boss, usually a big magical upgrade to an existing Rhinoc. The boss fights are fun enough with interesting mechanics and a solid challenge that relies on your skill set from the rest of the game. It's also cool that the friend that you freed from Moneybags eggs in the previews hub helps out somehow in the fight. I do prefer the bosses in Spyro 2 just slightly for 2 reasons. One, they just feel a bit better paced in Spyro 2. I like their flow more, which is something that's hard to boil down in a couple of words, but basically, with the way that the bosses in Spyro 2 functioned, I felt like I was consistently surprised by what the bosses did, but they never felt unfair. Whereas the boss fights in Year of the Dragon just felt a bit simpler and I guess easier. Still fun, but simpler. 2, most of the bosses in Year of the Dragon don't have much, if any, characterization. There's build up to the bosses in Ripto's Rage. You see all of the bosses near the start of and throughout the game, whereas in Year of the Dragon, almost all of the bosses are created right before you fight them. There's no time to create any characterization or build up for them. It's just, hey, here's the thing you're gonna fight, now go fight it. I definitely feel more of an affinity for Crush and Gulp than for Buzz and Scorch. Their designs are super great though. Now, that one notable exception is unfortunately the final boss of the game. I'll avoid any story bits related to the confrontation, of course, but as you can probably guess, the final boss is the Sorceress. The fight involves you avoiding attacks until a vehicle or turret becomes available for Spyro to jump onto or into. Then that can be used to actually damage the magical dinosaur. Still think she looks like an alligator. There are multiple vehicles, they don't feel particularly good to control, and it makes the fight feel anticlimactic. It's really unfortunate because all of the other bosses in Year of the Dragon are actually fun, but the one with the most build-up winds up being mediocre at best, especially if you compare the encounter to the wonderful multi-phase showdown with Ripto at the end of Spyro 2. Seriously, that boss fight was fucking amazing. It definitely doesn't entirely ruin the experience, and there is a fun bonus level that I won't spoil any of the details on that you unlock when you collect everything in the game up to that point, but that too ends on an unfortunately lackluster note. It's always unfortunate when what is meant to be a final climactic moment winds up leaving a sour taste in your mouth. Still, despite the problems that Spyro Year of the Dragon has, it is a really, really good game overall that I enjoyed the vast majority of my time with. Unfortunately, I can't say that I feel the same about the Reignited version of Year of the Dragon. Unlike the Reignited version of 2, there are actually a few gameplay aspects that are better in Spyro Year of the Dragon Reignited, or as I'll be calling it for most of the rest of this video for the sake of something resembling brevity, 3-ignited. But those improvements don't make up for how horribly the game messes up other aspects of the gameplay, design decision issues, and a ruined narrative. This video is already super long, and I'm basically now tacking on another game review on top of it. I'm not sure if I should apologize or say you're welcome. Either way, into mediocrity we descend. The graphics are both improved and worsened. Obviously, the high-definition paint job is wonderful and appreciated, and I think that the animations on Spyro are amazingly adorable. But aside from Spyro, the models have a very stiff, plasticky look to them. Very few of the animations use squash and stretch, which is baffling considering how big of a deal that was to the original release. It makes them look like they're toys that have come to life, and in this particular case, that makes them look soulless. It's just not what the original game was meant to look like, and if you're gonna be doing a remaster, I think you should try to be as faithful as you can be to the original. Maybe making improvements here and there to quality of life, or controls, or in some cases adding cut content. You're going to notice a recurring theme here. They copied the surface level of Year of the Dragon without really understanding what made the high points of the game so appealing. All flair, no depth. I slightly prefer the original soundtrack, but the new soundtrack is pretty solid as well, and the addition of dynamic music that changes the song somewhat based on how Spyro is moving is a nice touch. The visual changes are the easiest to tackle first. I already mentioned the plasticky look of the models, which I found off-putting, but these changes are pretty much all over the place. Enemies, levels, NPCs, so many things look different, many of them for the worse, while many others are seemingly completely arbitrary changes. Cloud Spires, for example, completely ruins the theme of that level. The whole idea is that clouds are made at this place, and so fittingly enough, in the original, the level's architecture looks like it could be made out of clouds, and very well could be in part, because, you know, magic. It's an interesting and unique look. In 3 Ignited, much of the white is replaced by gray, and any parts that could have been cloud before are very clearly stone. It's just a lot more boring of an aesthetic and has nothing to do with what the level actually is. In addition to this, the goal of the level is to reactivate the cloud factory. In the original, you do this by jumping on and thus activating bellows that you then use as platforms to progress through the level. It's a very smooth integration of the theme and goal of the level into the gameplay. In 3 Ignited, the bellows are replaced by like wood platform things, but at the end of the level the NPC still mentions the bellows even though they don't fucking exist in this version of the game. It's shoddy and lazy, and these types of things permeate the entire experience. There's a definite creative spark to the PS1 version of Year of the Dragon, and through some combination of malice, ignorance, and laziness, it's heavily suppressed throughout 3 Ignited. It still shines through at times. The original is a really good, fun game, to the point that some of that fun does transfer to 3 Ignited, but what's left in 3 Ignited very often feels shallow, uncreative, and corporate. A lot of the NPCs and enemies are completely changed, some of them in very minor and inoffensive ways, but in big or small ways. The most noticeable and consistent design philosophy seemed to be to make the models quote-unquote cuter. Bigger, moe blob anime style eyes, larger heads in comparison to the body to make things look more babyish, additional clothing or accessories, things like that. In combination with that plastic, lifeless look, it really didn't make me think that these designs were any cuter, and in some cases actually made me think they looked creepy. Some of these are slight modifications to the original designs, while others are more extreme changes that seem to completely disregard what the original design intent was. This affects even the bosses, many of whom go from looking cool and intimidating to cartoony and cutesy. The most offensive of these to me was Buzz, whose name is supposed to come from an attack he does that resembles a buzzsaw, but it's now made far less pointy, which makes the buzzsaw sound effect associated with it sound rather out of place. Bianca is also made cuter, which I think works against the character. Like, don't get me wrong, I already thought she was adorable in the original, but much like Alora's reignited treatment in 2, her new visual design isn't terrible on its own, but her line delivery combined with it really takes a lot of the venom and antagonism out of the character, which is like the whole point of her character. She's supposed to be an antagonist, and I think making her so much cuter and softer does a disservice to her and makes me like this rendition of the character a lot less overall, which is especially disappointing considering she was one of my favorite parts of the original.
Okay, Dragon, you've managed to survive longer than I expected, but you haven't the slightest idea what sort of dangers lie ahead of you. I suggest you grab your cat friend and whatever eggs you found and hightail it back home while you still can. I'm telling you this for your own good, you know.
Some NPCs and enemies that aren't made more cutesy are changed in strange, arbitrary ways, generally making them come off as strange or unfitting with the level. The example that stood out as the strangest to me was in Enchanted Towers. In the original, these purple dudes were fancy, aristocratic artist people. In 3 Ignited, they look like hipsters. It's just completely different for no fucking reason, and as far as I can tell, makes no sense. Maybe they were trying to make them look like a stereotypical art teacher or something? I don't know, whatever. It's fucking weird, and I really don't like the change. Designs and animations are far lazier. Any custom death animations are replaced with standard ones. Some of the hit animations for NPCs are just not there. And while the Rhinox in Year of the Dragon had a wide variety of body types, it seems like there's just one base model of Rhinox that gets recolored, rescaled, and shoved into different outfits in 3 Ignited, further sucking more of the soul out of the original. Also, there seemed to be even fewer baby dragon designs than in the original. The same model would repeat multiple times, and they weren't even cleverly spread out to make it less noticeable. They even removed some of the custom animations, including my favorite one from Ba. Also, this is even more perplexing and damning when you consider that Spyro 1 Reignited has unique designs for every single dragon that you rescue. To be fair, there are way more baby dragons. I'm not even opposed to some repeats, but it's something that makes it clear that Spyro 1 got all of the love in the Reignited trilogy, while 2 and Year of the Dragon were much lower priorities that feel sloppy and rushed by comparison. I mean, there's concept art to unlock in this game that shows baby dragon designs that never actually got put into the game. Maybe if it got delayed until it could have actually been properly finished, this entire video would have been focused on a wonderful, more accessible Spyro game with a small section comparing it to the PS1 original. But instead, here I am with an absolute mountain of complaints. As far as I'm concerned, the PS1 game actually looks better than the PS4 version, taking all aspects of design and animation into account. It's a textbook example. No matter how far technology may advance, the skill and artistry in all aspects of game design is still more important to creating an enjoyable and memorable experience. The small changes to the levels and physics of the game change it in ways that enable certain jumps that you definitely couldn't do in the original, and since they just grabbed the supercharge mechanics from Reignited 1, Spyro speeds up as the supercharge continues, as opposed to running at a set speed. The courses and thieves aren't changed to reflect this mechanical difference, so it feels bad, is incredibly easy, and whatever this bullshit is can happen. There's also content that's just completely missing. There's dialogue that is just cut, instances where in the original you could talk to NPCs, and you can't in this. Bamboo Terrace specifically jumps to mind. Just like in Spyro 2 Reignited, the skill point epilogues are gone and replaced with an art gallery, which is just so fucking upsetting to me. Like, it's such an interesting and fun piece of content that would be relatively simple to integrate, but no. Why actually put all of the content that was in the original game into the remaster of that game? Like, it's not like the fucking Tingle tuner that required an extra peripheral. It was a simple menu that you paged through with screenshots and a bit of text. How hard is text with screenshots? Come the fuck on! Missing content in something like this is a bit of a fucking pet peeve for me, in case you couldn't tell. There are some changes to cutscenes, because of course there are. There's the obvious stuff like line delivery and animation differences. I found most of these changes to be for the worse, but overall relatively innocuous, with one notable and rather important exception. The cutscenes that play before boss fights, except the final boss, all have added content. They feature the friend that you can free in the next hub in the cage in the sorceress's throne room, giving a sort of running commentary on the conversation between the sorceress and Bianca. But those two antagonists never directly respond to this commentary. At most, they kind of awkwardly look over. The other playable characters were originally in the background as a sort of Easter egg or foreshadowing, pick your poison, but now they frequently take front and center attention, which makes the scenes that are supposed to be focused on characterizing our antagonists come off more like comedic bits. I don't understand why it's changed, and I don't understand why the sorceress puts up with the comments from the peanut gallery. It makes her seem less threatening, as if her 3 Ignited design didn't perform enough character assassination already. And near the end of the game, Agent 9's aggro-style commentary annihilates the narrative tension, ruining what was one of my favorite scenes in the original. Hunter's flanderized characterization continues from the previous game. In the original, he's a kind-hearted but dim-witted friend of Spyro's. His line delivery in 3 Ignited often comes off as outright stupid, and sometimes what was lighthearted teasing in the original becomes downright mean in 3 Ignited.
I think my tongue is frozen. You better not lose again.
I think my tongue is frozen. You better not lose again.
I do really like Hunter in the original trilogy, but his presence in the Reignited games turns him into a much more abrasive character. It's also super inconsistent with most of the other changes throughout the Reignited trilogy. Despite most of the characters actually being made much softer, cuter, and or nicer, up to and including antagonists, I feel like this new interpretation of Hunter would try to shove me in a locker or steal my lunch money or something. It's weird and off-putting, and I miss the old, lovable himbo that adventured around with Spyro. If the gameplay held up, then I could see some people looking past all of the problems I've already laid out, and the core of the gameplay is admittedly pretty solid. It feels good to jump and glide through the levels of Spyro, and I mentioned before that his animations, at least, look absolutely astounding. I adore his pouncy walk cycle in Reignited, and the Sparks levels and what made those fun are pretty much identical, so at least those things are relatively well executed on. It's just the vast majority of the rest of the gameplay that is made far less engaging, if not outright ruined. Most enemies are easier to deal with, their animations just don't come out as fast as they used to, which means going full aggro on enemies works far more often than in the original. Year of the Dragon wasn't a particularly hard game to begin with, so lowering the difficulty even more just makes things boring. However, sometimes the game does have something resembling a challenge from a change. Invincibility frames for Spyro are either completely gone or so short-lived as to be functionally non-existent. There are instances where if an attack hits Spyro while he's stunned from another attack, that attack will also hit him, which means you're taking 2 damage from only 1 mistake. It feels fucking terrible. It can happen with multiple attacks or with an attack knocking you into an environmental hazard. It was definitely most noticeable on Dino Mines, where some enemies can hit you multiple times with a single attack. So they ruined my favorite level. God damn it. The normal egg objectives where you're just controlling Spyro are all fucked up in some way, usually making them laughably easy to the point of tedium. Pretty much any time the camera should change to another perspective to obscure information from the player for one of these, it just doesn't, which generally means you can easily deal with the activity with the awesome power of camera controls. Truly astounding. Farley's section isn't as fun, but that's mainly due to his new character design and animations. Once again, Reignited took away a very good boy from me. It's not as bad as what they did to George, in my opinion, but it's still a crime against everything that's good and wholesome in the world. Things are overall slower paced and easier to deal with. The problem isn't as noticeable with these ones as in Spyro 2 Reignited because there's simply fewer activities that don't change the gameplay in a much more massive way. So once again, we're just gonna go through category by category. The vehicles are all made worse, and as a whole, they were only okay at best before. There's only a single vehicle section that is made better, the Hunter Speedboat section. It's easier to avoid obstacles, and the jump is made shorter so you don't go careening into things that you couldn't see when you hit the jump button. Credit where credit is due, these changes are definitely for the better, and it took a section that was a chore in Year of the Dragon and turned it into something that was at least palatable, if not maybe kind of fun. So, aside from that one, every single one is worse to some degree in Reignited. If it wasn't clear by now, this also includes the Hunter sections, aside from the rail shooter and flight suit sections, I guess. Those are fine too, if those even count as vehicle bits. Okay, fine, just the plain bit with Hunter sucks. The most common problem with the updated controls is the handling. The boat and submarine just feel the slightest bit worse to control. They're looser, which makes the boss of the speedboat section miserable to fight, while it's also incredibly easy because its AI is brain dead now, barely chasing Spyro at all. There's no challenge, but it's still a pain. Most of the other vehicles' problems come from a very specific and completely incomprehensible change. They're made fucking gigantic. Enemy sizes are relatively close to what they were in the original, but you're now massive by comparison, which was definitely not the intended design, and moreover makes it easier to get hit in these sections, some of which you only have a single hit point in. The enemies can be harder to hit, or in some cases even notice, and the camera placement makes the new vehicle sizes obtrusive. It just looks bad, and feels bad to fit. Of course, larger vehicles have larger turning radiuses, which is fine assuming you design the enemies and levels to fit that, which they very much did not. My primary feeling from this change is just overwhelming confusion. It doesn't make any sense to me to make a change this extreme and not design the sections around that to fit. Many of the design decisions, I can understand what they were trying to do. I just think they failed. I can't even get that far with this one. It's just a thing that's different just because. The skateboard has unique issues. On the positive side of things, they did make it so you can more easily register tricks with the left stick, which is good. It's just that tricks are way harder to actually land. The hitbox for it seems about the same, but in the original, when you let go of the trick button, it would sort of snap you back to being upright so you could land properly. It didn't work if you were like upside down, but if you were pretty close, it would ensure you actually got it just right. Now, this correction is much weaker, so you have to angle yourself much more precisely if you don't want to crash, which is even harder than it otherwise would be because you spin and flip faster and stopping your momentum is more difficult as well. Also, the way you build up speed is different now. It's more like binary instead of more gradual, and that makes it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to pull off some of the more complicated tricks, because there's a bunch of little Easter egg tricks in there. There's a steep learning curve, and even once I got it down pretty consistently, it literally never felt good to do. And it seemed like sometimes the physics engine would just go crazy and cause a crash or other weird things. These were most common on the race bits. The races were especially torturous as you're allowed very few, if any, mistakes on the harder ones and need to consistently land tricks to get boost gauge, which again feels terrible and inconsistent. As you might be able to guess, I got stuck on one of these race sections for quite a while, and I encountered what you could call a bit of a technical issue. The game started to slow down, just barely at first, but as I continued to play more and more, it just got slower and slower, eventually making the game nearly unplayable. The problem persisted even when leaving the section or going to another level. My best guess is that it was a memory leak issue. I'm genuinely shocked this still exists and wasn't patched out at some point. It wasn't too difficult to fix, just close and reopen the game, but it was still quite the interesting experience that probably shouldn't have been a part of the game, even if I did actually wind up having some fun messing around with it. That might have actually been the second most fun I had with Reignited.
Was the memory leak issue?
Yeah.
And being like, I am slow.
Yes. Just messing, well, because you know my weird reaction to glitches, which is like,
oh
yeah! Oh, poppin'! Woo! Oh shit, the seams, it's falling apart. I can see the ones and zeros behind the fucking wall. Flight in the speedways is also different. You're faster in general, which makes the time attacks even easier, but the races kind of suck now. The physics on the flying have a bit of momentum and drift to them now. Turning feels very different, especially when you're going fast, which you're doing very often because of the boosts. The races felt fun in the original, but in Reignited, I felt more like I was corralling Spyro in the correct direction. The courses just aren't made with these different physics in mind. Also, the opponents are all tuned individually in a different way from the original. For the most part, they're actually pretty slow. The biggest challenge is actually struggling with the controls rather than the opponents, though weirdly, the first speedway is fucked hard. Those butterflies seem to be going Mach speeds. You basically have to hit all the boosts perfectly if you want to win. And then all the following speedways ask way less from you. It's like an anti-difficulty curve, which is, generally speaking, bad game design. The other playable characters are thankfully more of a mixed bag. Sheila's design is definitely different. She falls into the let's just make it cuter box, and of course her voice acting takes away a lot of the punch of her character because she's a woman, and women in Spyro Reignited are not allowed to express any range of emotions that might let anyone perceive them as anything other than cute. Gameplay-wise, her sections are mostly close enough to their original incarnation to still be enjoyable. There are a couple of instances where physics go a bit fucky, most notably in the section where you're supposed to destroy a fort. Also, the escort mission is made easier because one of those types of obstacles you destroy for the NPCs just never respawns between attempts, which I guess is just meant to make it easier. It's questionable, but not something I take big issue with, cause for the second time now, that section fucking sucked. Overall, Sheila is relatively unchanged, so fair enough. Sergeant Bird's an interesting case that I honestly am not entirely sure how to feel about. There are changes, but those changes are both for the better and the worse. Visually, he seems far more peppy and lighthearted, which I don't think was the original design intent, but sure, okay, that's just becoming expected for 3 Ignited at this point. Generally speaking, he just feels better to control. The looseness of his flight is tightened up, and actually feels good to fly around as Sergeant Bird, as opposed to just okay or at times bad. The problem is that the homing on his missiles is a bit fucky now. It seems to start homing more aggressively much sooner, which winds up with situations where missiles will careen off to chase down unintended targets, and the homing is just weak enough that it often doesn't actually hit anything after it zooms off in some seemingly random direction, which feels really, really bad. You can re-aim your shots, of course, and can fire pretty often to counteract the problem, but it's still a problem that didn't exist in the original release. You also just generally move much faster as Sergeant Bird. Overall, despite the issues with rockets, the Sergeant Bird sections actually feel much easier, possibly due to the easier enemy design of 3 Ignited in general. If I have to pick a side to come down on, I think I prefer the original's version of Sergeant Bird, if only because the challenge made it more engaging, but it's not a particularly strong preference on this one. Bentley, on the other hand, I found to be completely ruined. His visual design is fine, actually, but the camera zooms way in over the shoulder for the gameplay. It's the same problem as with the overly large vehicles. The playable character occupies way too much of the screen. Honestly, in Bentley's case, I found it actively disorienting. It made my head hurt a bit. Spyro 3 Ignited hurt me, physically, and emotionally, and spiritually. Not sure how to check for scars on my soul. At any rate, it feels bad to move around as him because of this new perspective, and I definitely just felt less powerful overall as Bentley. The sound design and visuals on his big hit just simply aren't as satisfying, which took away one of the biggest things I liked about his sections. Also, I may have discovered evidence in this game that 3 Ignited Bentley has distant relations to the Bandicoots. See, in the original, he would actually spin his stick around to deflect projectiles, but in 3 Ignited, it's like a tornado animation. For some reason. I could almost buy that it was a reference to Crash or something if I wasn't utterly convinced that it looks like this solely because that's easier to animate. Yeti boxing is also easier, for better or worse. They did you dirty, Bentley. I'm so sorry. This next thing, I was legitimately fucking shocked by. All but one of the Agent 9 sections are actually super fun in 3 Ignited. They just made the character a lot more fun. Now, to be clear, that functionally means that 2 of the 4 sections were improved. The rail shooter was fun before, and the one that still isn't fun is the Gauntlet of Trials you have to survive. It's maybe a bit easier, but still pretty shit. Also, grenades are pretty much unchanged, which means they're not great. But the improvements to the other Agent 9 sections are phenomenal and come from a very simple place. You can aim with the right stick now, and there's an aiming reticule in the third-person sections. For the first-person section, movement is reworked so you don't have to use the strafe buttons to move left and right, and of course you can aim with the right stick. These are very simple additions, of course, but based upon the quality of the changes in 3 Ignited, I quite frankly didn't expect even that much. It takes a part of the game that was otherwise extremely dated, modernizes it, and allows the original design intent to shine. I wish this was the design philosophy for the rest of the game, but it's a diamond in the rough, and it's definitely not worth slogging through the rest of 3 Ignited to get to, but I did legitimately have a lot of fun with Agent 9 this time around. Good job, otherwise mediocre developers. I wish that this part of the game could just be lifted from 3 Ignited and placed into the original. I mentioned before that Sparks' levels are preserved pretty well, which is good, but but there is a bit of a problem that exists related to them. In the original, completing Sparks levels would unlock new abilities, including the ability for Sparks to point at the nearest uncollected gem, and warping between levels. These abilities are unlocked from the start in 3 Ignited, which is fine, but originally Zoe is supposed to talk a bit after the Sparks levels, detailing the new ability that Sparks has unlocked. This just doesn't happen on the levels that give the already unlocked abilities. It's weird. And while more understandable than many of the other instances, it is more cut dialogue, which does bother me a lot. The boss fights are worse. Every single one of them. Visually, they look much less intimidating, which is par for the course for 3 Ignited, but also for some reason the boss fights all lock the camera onto the boss now, which made avoiding attacks more difficult, and I very often found myself running past things in the boss arenas that I was either supposed to pick up or charge into, while also finding it more annoying to deal with enemies that the bosses spawned than in the original for the exact same reason. Like so many other changes to 3 Ignited, it's arbitrary and serves only to make the experience worse. Also, the Sorceress boss is even worse because of the problems I described with the vehicles. I won't show it because spoilers, but the final vehicle you use handles especially poorly. Ugh. Okay, so Spyro Year of the Dragon Reignited is pretty much terrible. It does have more redeeming qualities than Spyro 2 Reignited had, but it's still just an inferior experience to the original PS1 game. Surprisingly, I actually had a worse time with 3 Ignited than 2 Reignited. On paper, 3 Ignited should be at least slightly better. Maybe it's just that I prefer Spyro 2 in general, or that 3 Ignited struck me as even more soulless. I'm not sure. I honestly don't know how much of 3 Ignited I could have even gotten through without the help of the ever-lovely Lily. She has a rather comprehensive, rivaling encyclopedic level of knowledge about many of the Spyro games, including Year of the Dragon. She played through and recorded a good chunk of the footage you saw throughout this section for 3 Ignited, while making sure that I saw the differences or when the actual gameplay differed. She handed the controller to me. I still wound up playing a rather large chunk of the game, but we shared the sanity damage, which made the whole experience survivable at the very least. And she helped me with recalling information while working on the script, as well as helping out with various aspects of video production. So I want to give a big thank you to her and allow her to say basically whatever she wants here. Lily?
I am so glad we're done with the bad Spyro games.
But...
Oh, wait. Oh, no. However, I do think that 2 Ignited and 3 Ignited are the worst Spyro games. Even Enter the Dragonfly.
Really?
Yes, because they aren't corruptions on something that was good.
Okay, so it's
Enter
more
the
of
Dragonfly is bad, but I might be wrong about this. Watch me be wrong about this in the Spyro 4 video.
Uh-huh.
I do think that Enter the Dragonfly is a better game than 2 or 3 Ignited.
Now, okay. So what that might be...
However, I do think that Enter the Dragonfly would be worse if 2 and 3 Ignited were...
good.
Existed on their own without the original 2 and 3.
That's fair. It's probably just that, like, you're not comparing it as directly to 2 and 3. Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of. I will judge for myself, of course, eventually. Not that that's happening anytime soon, so don't hold your breath on those.
I don't have to record footage of old game anymore. Yay!
You never had to.
Shut up, yes you did.
Okay. Shut up, yes you did?
Yes. You had me do it.
Well, yeah, but, like, you didn't have to.
Yes, you made me do it.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
You offered.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't. Do
you want me to record some original Xenoblade Chronicles footage?
Not really.
And some Xenoblade Chronicles 3D footage. And some Xenoblade Chronicles
I don't think I need
Wii
it
HD
because
texture pack.
the reason I needed this footage is because the comparison was so extensive. When it's something along the lines of this version is just better, play this one. It's easier.
I don't mean a lot of it. I just mean like the opening.
If-
So you could just be like, the game looked shitty, and then it looked worse, and then Takahashi doth came down and said, "Let Shulk be a twink."
And so it was.
And so it was. And so it was.
Shulk looks so bad. He looks so bad in the old ones.
So bad.
Shulk, though! Shulk's hair!
Shulk.
Shulk. Shulk.
Shulk.
Shulk.
Shulk.
This is why we shouldn't record at 5 in the morning. Or you're welcome.
Decide what you want to be in there.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll just decide to leave literally the entire fucking thing in.
Okay.
Just the whole thing. Including this.
Hi, again. Okay, keep going now. Record the script, please.
Okay, fine. So we can sleep. Please, if you at all have the capacity to play the original PS1 release, experience the game that way. It is so much better. While I definitely don't think the Reignited version of Year of the Dragon is worth your time, I definitely do think that the original PS1 release is. All of the problems come down to relatively brief gameplay issues that didn't drag down the whole experience for me. Still, in Spyro 2, I was constantly looking forward to and enjoying everything that the game threw my way, but in the case of Year of the Dragon, my enjoyment wasn't as all-encompassing. There were enough mediocre or outright bad vehicle and companion character sections that I did get a bit cautious whenever a side area seemed to stray too far from series convention. Despite those issues, the game is absolutely brimming with charm, personality, and wit in every single moment. Every line of dialogue is wonderfully written, and the world created here is one that I'll look back fondly on for years and years. Even if the gameplay experience wasn't as consistent as in Ripto's Rage, I do applaud Insomniac's willingness to try new things, and would have loved to see what a fourth Spyro game from them looked like that refined some of the ideas here, and I'm interested to see how Insomniac's design philosophy evolves throughout their other games. My experience with the first 3 Spyro games has made me a passionate, and in this case, apparently rather verbose fan of both Insomniac and the Spyro franchise. This adventure was one well worth taking. This has been Kalice. Thanks for watching. You can like the video, subscribe, or share this video around if you enjoyed it and want to. My Patreon exists if you'd like to support me. There's neat bonuses like access to my Discord server and the ability to vote in polls to determine future content on the channel, so feel free to go look at that. Speaking of, big thanks to all of my current patrons like Lotta, Edith, Lily, and Sam, all of whom are really cool people. And just FYI, that's a different Lily from the one featured in this video.
I'm the Lily featured in this video.
It's true. Keep
Since ours on my hit list.
Valid. Keep loving what you love, and I'll see you next time with something else. My first exposure to Insomniac was through the first 2 Resistance games, actually, which I will say are just slightly different to Spyro. It's not going to happen immediately, but I am interested to see how exactly Insomniac got from cute purple dragon platformer to alt-history World War II FPS with evil aliens. Video games are cool.